Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to the latest episode of Sovereign Submission. Today, I'm going to talk about the topic of a female-led relationship and how to identify whether or not you actually want to be in a female-led relationship. Now, I want to first acknowledge that Sheena's here. Hi, Sheena. Welcome. I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by a female-led relationship. And I want to talk about the first thing I want to really touch on too is like how this runs counter to the narrative that so many men hear, and yet it is a deep yearning inside for many, many men. Men hear this message that we need to lead, that we need to be the leader in the relationship. And it's not just men that I hear this from. I also see it from women as well. I've seen a number of women here on Substack, for example, who say, oh, men have to lead. I want a man who's going to lead. And that in and of itself can be a very challenging aspect to all this because then men see this and they think, okay, well, I guess I have to be the one who leads. And they don't necessarily want to lead. So why is it then that this narrative is so prevalent, especially of late? What I've come to recognize about this particular narrative is that as it's become so prevalent because in a large way, I think people are lost. And so there's this thing of, well, we have to go back to what we know. The problem being that what we know hasn't worked all that well. And, this is just a simple reality that I think a lot of people fail to recognize. Before I go any further, I want to welcome Terry. Welcome. And, as people join in, if you have comments or questions, feel free to drop those into here and I'll be happy to respond to them. The thing of it is that like if we look at this concept of men having to lead in relationship, it automatically presupposes that men want to lead in relationship when in fact they may not. And speaking as a man who does not want to be the leader in the relationship, I can tell you that it's actually a real relief to let that particular aspect down and to let that go. And to know that, in fact, I prefer to be in a female-led relationship. What I've discovered about myself is that the pressure of having to quote unquote be the leader and be in charge of everything actually takes away a lot of joy and presence in my life. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is men hear this theme, this meme, this message of men must lead, that men need to be the ones in charge and in control. And they they feel like, okay, I have to go do that now. Now, here's the irony of all that. And it's something I actually wrote in a Substack note recently. If you're being told that you have to lead and that's why you become a leader, are you a leader? The answer is no. You're not. You're not a leader if you're being told by other people that you have to lead. You're just following along with what someone else has told you. One of the most sovereign choices that you could ever make in your life is to really sit down with this statement of men have to lead, if you're a man and or a woman, and really examine and question it. Like, why is that? And don't get me wrong, I get that there are some women who want that particular style of relationship. And yet the irony is I suspect that there are more women who don't really want men to lead, but they think that's the only way they're going to get the type of relationship they want. They want to feel safe in relationship. They want to feel like they can relax into their physiology. They want to feel like they can know that this man has got them. And so they think, well, the only way that's going to happen is if the man leads in the relationship. But that's not the case at all. A man does not have to lead in a relationship in order to show the devotion and presence and awareness that she is craving and that she wants to have to feel safe. All he really needs to do is get clear on the fact that the relationship is a priority and that he wants to show up and be of service and devotion. Now, I do think that many women struggle with receiving devotion from a man, and there are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons I suspect is the case is because, again, we have this big cultural theme that kind of just says the idea of a devoted man that man must be weaker or not good or not as strong. And if anything, it takes a lot of strength to be devoted. It takes commitment as well. Something that Sheena and I talked about one time. We talked about the difference between devotion and commitment. Devotion is kind of the if you will, it's the intent. Like, I have this intention to have devotion, but commitment is the actions that follow through. So a man can say that he's devoted, and that's all fine and well, but the real question is he showing that? Is he taking action? In an exchange that I recently had with another Substacker, we were kind of talking about this. I had shared an insight on her post about the fact that one of the reasons that, you know, she had talked about this situation where she had cooked the stew and the parsnips weren't thoroughly cooked. She threw them in later. She served the stew, and the man said, "Oh, it's great," when in fact it was like, no, it really wasn't that good at all. And at the very end, he asked if they could date again, and she's like, "No, I'm not going to go on a date with you." And the reason why was because she's like, he's demonstrated that he's not going to speak up and speak the truth. I can't trust that. And that was a good point. And then I commented on it and I said the other thing that he's demonstrated is that he's not able to take care of himself. And because he's not able to take care of himself, he's basically putting her into the position of mom. Well, I can tell you, I can safely say out there that there is no woman out there who wants to be mom to a man other than maybe the mom that actually spawned you. And even then, there may be times where she doesn't really want that. Um, but the thing of it is, but that's more out of exasperation. But the thing of it is this is one of the weaknesses that a lot of men have. A lot of times, what they end up doing is they go looking for mom in the relationships that they get involved in. And if you feel like a sense of revulsion and a little bit of ick with that, yeah, of course you're going to feel that. It makes total sense. Because the fact of the matter is, the man who is looking for mom is essentially looking to heal his mother wound. He's looking for he doesn't have himself yet. He hasn't figured himself out, and he hasn't done the necessary work to differentiate his relationship with his mom from the relationship that he would have with other women in his life. And there are a lot of men out there right now, whether they realize it or not, who are carrying this mother wound around because they haven't resolved it yet fully. Welcome, Ray. Glad to have you here. Again, if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to drop those in. So let me be clear that the desire for a female-led relationship is not equivalent to looking for mom. Like, I don't have any desire to quote unquote look for mom in the relationship that I'm in. And the fact of the matter is, it's not a healthy, that's not a healthy exploration of a female-led relationship. That is just a case where basically a man is saying, I want you to parent me. Well, if you're a grown-ass man and you want to be parented by somebody, there is probably some issues there that need to be explored. And I'm talking about outside of the bedroom. That might be a kink that you have, and if there's consent on all sides, then hey, great. Not my kink, but I'm not going to kink shame either. But the point being that, like, when we look at relationships, right, we have to really look at what we're bringing into those relationships. And let's be clear here, women have their own wounds that they need to resolve and work through as well. Women need to do their work just as men need to do their work. And until those wounds are resolved and worked through, they will keep showing up in the relationships that you get into. Something that I've observed both in my own journey, but also in the journey of other people, is that we often end up dating our parents. What I mean by that is, you go and you date somebody, and that person reminds you in some ways of your dad or in some ways of your mom. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to resolve the pattern that wasn't resolved with your parents, that couldn't have been resolved with your parents, but you're trying to do it through relationship. And that's not the place to do it. So it's really important to understand these distinctions. So then, what does a female led relationship look like? What's a healthy example of a female led relationship where we're not playing out these particular roles? Well, first of all, as a man, you've done your work. You have done the best you can to resolve your parent wounds. And if you still have them, you are actively working on them and you're getting help with that work. And you're doing that work outside of the relationship that you're in. You're working with a coach like me. You might be working with a therapist, or you might be doing some work in your men's circle around these things. And that's a good thing. And the other thing, though, is that when you're going into a relationship, you're very clear, like, how do I want to show up in this relationship? What does it look like for me to be in a relationship where I am able to fully express my desires and wants? Let me be very clear here. Not all men want to be the leader in relationship. If you're a man who works a high pressure job, the last thing you want to do is come home and be the leader at home. And by extension, the same thing applies for a woman. She may not want that. But here's the subtle signs, I think, that for a man to recognize, and this is also maybe even something to explore in general, outside of the context of even men, just like something that women may want to spend some time looking at. Do you want to be of service to her? Is the idea of taking care of her, looking after her, and making sure that she's able to relax and be comfortable something that appeals to you? If the answer is yes, then that's probably a good sign that you want to be in a female-led relationship. What I've typically found that is different from men who are quote unquote dominant and men who are submissive is that the dominant men don't necessarily always want to tend to that level of service. They may want to receive that service, but they don't necessarily want to express it in the same way. So I think it's really important to recognize that. For example, for me, one of the ways that I like to be of service is, taking care of the dishes or cooking dinner or doing stuff like that. For me, this is something that brings me a quiet level of contentment and joy because I know that I'm taking care of her. It's something that she doesn't necessarily need to go and do. And let's be clear here that when I talk about female-led relationships, I'm not just talking about the DS dynamic of a dominant and a submissive. Because the thing is there can be men who aren't necessarily oriented toward that particular desire, but they still want to be able to let go, or they still want to be able to surrender in some ways to a female-led relationship. They want to experience that. They want the direction and clarity. So that's an important thing. So if a man wants to be of service, if there are ways that he wants to show up and take care of her, that's a good sign that he wants a female-led relationship. If the man is a second sign is if the man is able to speak for what he wants and desires, but is not attached to having to have it his way. This may seem like a funny thing, but there are a lot of men out there who get hung up on having things be a certain way. Actually, this is just true of people in general. But if you're able to let go of that and kind of be in this idea of like, I don't have to have things be a certain way, but I can still speak up for what I want and desire, then that's a healthy sign that you know how to communicate and that you're also willing to let go of the reins. You don't have to be in control of the experience. You can say, I want this type of experience. And I think, and I want to emphasize that it's really important to speak up for what you want. All too often what I see is that people will abdicate that responsibility, and that is not a healthy sign of a relationship. That's just a codependent relationship at that point. Like if I'm giving up what I want, if I'm not speaking up for what I want and I'm just hoping that she's going to figure it out, what I'm really doing is setting up a dynamic where I'm putting her in control, but I'm not doing it in a way where it's consensual, and I'm certainly not doing it in a way that's actually allowing for genuine communication. And it ends up creating a lot of resentment on the part of both people. She resents the man because he's not showing up and speaking for what he wants, and she's being put into a position that she doesn't necessarily want. He resents her because she hasn't figured out what he wants and isn't anticipating it. It creates a very unhealthy dynamic. That's not what we want. Ideally, both partners or more, depending on what your relationship dynamic is, are communicating in a healthy, clear, consistent manner. Example, it's a silly one, but I'm gonna use it. It's not really silly, but it's case in point. So last night I'm doing virtual board gaming with Sheena and our other partner, and I end up we're playing some different games, and there's a game that I've seen on Board Game Arena, which is the website that we go to and game on, and I've been seeing it a few times now, and I'm like, I want to play that game. I spoke up for it. I said, "Hey, I'd like to play this game." I wasn't attached to the outcome. I didn't assume that automatically that I was going to get what I wanted. I was perfectly willing to surrender that to the experience. All three of us talked about it, and in the end we're like, "Yeah, let's give it a try. Let's try this game out. We haven't played it before. Maybe it'll be fun to try something new." And it was a little frustrating, but it ended up being fun as well. Case in point though, if I hadn't spoken up for that, if I hadn't said anything, then nothing would happen at all. I think one of the most important things that we can do is we can learn to speak up for what we want and need. And again, we also have to we also have to recognize that we're not going to automatically get a yes. One of the healthiest experiences that a man can have, in my opinion, is when he gets rejected, when he gets told no, whether it's being told no to a relationship or being told no to something that he wants. Why is that healthy? Well, because rejection is a fact of life. We're not going to always get what we want. And so when we can accept that we're not always going to get what we want, that can actually be a really healthy thing because we learn how to become less attached to what we want. Welcome, Emma. Glad to have you here. And again, if any of you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those in. So I've identified at this point two signs as to how you might identify whether or not you want a female-led relationship. So I'm going to speak to number 3 now. Another sign that you may want to have a female-led relationship is actually how you show up in the bedroom. What I mean by that is that a lot of times men are told, oh, in this current climate, oh, you have to lead. You have to lead in the relationship. You have to lead in the bedroom. But what if you don't want to lead in the bedroom? Not all men want to lead in the bedroom. Sometimes they want to be told what to do, or they want to be directed or guided or focused. And this can actually be a real turn on, depending on the circumstances. And sometimes the man might, quote unquote, seem to lead in the relationship or in the bedroom, but actually what he's doing is he's being a service top. I, for example, am a service top. In the bedroom, the way that I play is that I'm very much reading her as best as possible. But I'm also asking her what she wants sometimes, and sometimes I'm just taking direction and guidance from her. And I still love it when she sits on my face and when she does other things to me and where she's showing that she's in control. In fact, it's something that I've asked for and encouraged a lot of the time because it's a fucking turn on. And the reality is that's part of how we identify what we want. But being a service top for me is one of those cases where, yes, I can top someone, but I'm topping them from a place of how can I bring them the best possible pleasure? What can I do to bring them the most amount of enjoyment? And the way that I tend to show up in the bedroom is that I tend to focus on how can I bring this person the most amount of pleasure possible? How can I bring them the enjoyment? And that's what gets me off. I mean, granted, I enjoy the act of sex. I enjoy other things, but it's one of those things where my orientation is very much based around pleasing the other person. So I think it's really important to recognize what's your orientation as far as the bedroom goes. When you're in the bedroom with somebody or wherever you happen to be, maybe you're in the kitchen or somewhere else fun and exotic, right? But what's your focus? Is your focus on getting on experiencing your own pleasure? Is your focus on their pleasure? Is it somewhere in between? Are you doing what you're doing because you want to be of service to them, or are you doing what you're doing because it's something that gets you off in its own way? No wrong answers here, but I think that if we want a female-led relationship, we have to really look at what is our desire in the bedroom and how that motivates and changes things. So that's an important component to all of this. So now we've gotten to 3 out of the 5 reasons that you may want to be in a female-led relationship. Before I go on, do any of you have any questions, comments, or other things like that? I'll wait a moment and take a sip of water. Okay, I'm going to continue on here. But if you do have questions or comments, make sure you pop them in there because I love it when people have questions and comments because that just makes it more fun. So another sign that you may want a female-led relationship may be around your relationship to responsibility. Now, this is going to seem like a slightly odd one. Here's my opinion on this. Somebody who doesn't want to have responsibility, who wants to abdicate their responsibility, that's not necessarily a healthy thing. I don't think that of anybody. So when I talk about responsibility, and what I'm really talking about though is a concept that I talk about with my clients, and it's something that I think is very an important thing to understand about the word responsibility. When we break the word responsibility up, we have ability to respond. Your relationship with responsibility can speak a lot to how you show up in a relationship. For example, if you tend to react a lot, that's actually, you're not really in a place of responsibility. You're in a place of reaction. You're reacting to both internal triggers and sensations and experiences, and you're reacting to what's going on around you. When you're in a place of responsibility, you're choosing how you respond. But a man who wants a female-led relationship will often also be paying attention to, again, the cues, kind of like what's going on with her, what's happening with her. Is there stuff that she wants? Are there things that he could be doing to show up for her in certain ways, or paying attention to cues that she may not even be fully bringing up? So it's that ability to respond, and it's really that ability to actually pay attention. A man who pays close attention to what is going on in the life of his partner is likely seeking some female guidance and leadership. And he may very well appreciate the way that she subtly guides him. Because what I found myself in my own relationship is that she will often subtly guide me. There will be things that she'll say. Now, she can be very direct, and I appreciate that because I prefer directness over anything else. But I also love those little touches of subtle guidance, those things that she'll do that'll just kind of say to me, like, okay, I've got you, and I want you to do this for me, or I want you to pay attention to this thing for me. Like when she puts her foot on my lap when we're at the game table and I start massaging it, like that for me is like, okay, that's, she wants me to take care of her and pay attention to her in that way. That's a subtle sign. Well, maybe not so subtle, but it's her putting her foot and saying like, hey, you take care of this for me, right? And of course, I love it. It's a chance for me to be of service to her. So look at the way that you are in relationship. Are you paying attention to her? Are you focused on like what's going on with her? Are you seeking guidance from her? And are you taking her cues that she's giving you? Because if she's giving you cues, she's definitely providing some level of leadership and guidance to you. You may not even think that, but it's the case. I was reading something earlier. It was actually on Facebook um, the other day where like this person was sharing a story where this guy who was quote unquote a dominant, he was loud and upset, and his partner just sat at the table and said in a soft voice, "I need you to be quiet now." And what did he do? He quieted down. She soft armed him. She knew what she wanted, and he immediately responded to what she wanted. He took her guidance. You know, now maybe they really are in a dynamic where he's normally the one who's quote unquote in charge. But I think a lot of the times that it's just that ends up being more of a performance than anything else. The real thing to look at is the presence. Who has the presence in the room? Who has the energy in the room? And how's the other person responding to that presence and energy? Now, as somebody who enjoys being in a female-led relationship, I definitely bring my own presence. But the way that I bring that presence is from a place of that desire to serve, that desire to be there and take care of her. And so it is very much responding to her energy and her presence. and taking her guidance. So that's a very important thing. All right, our final sign that you may want to be in a female-led relationship. This is a spiritual component. The spiritual component is, how do you connect with the overall energy, the feminine current? And what is your desire for that feminine current and how it shows up in your life? Now, personal example here. As a young kid, I read the Greek myths by Robert Graves, and the stories that always appealed to me the most were the ones about Aphrodite. I was fascinated with Aphrodite as a goddess. There's just something so powerful about her, the way that she could basically compel men and direct them and guide them, and how she was like they wanted to be with her, and she very much at the same time was really in control of the relationship. And I remembered the same thing reading some stories about Inanna and Ishtar. I think that, we have these ancient matrilineal energies, matriarchal energies, these goddess energies, this feminine current that is still alive. And in some ways it's been kind of buried, but it's still there, and it's still and it's still present. And I think that when a man can acknowledge that there is a strong desire to be initiated through the feminine current, not just through the masculine current, but the feminine current, and to fully take that in and receive it, that can be a good sign that he actually wants a female-led relationship. Reading the myths that I read as a child definitely influenced my experience of the feminine current, and continues to play a role. In my house, I have a shrine to Aphrodite. She's in the center of the house for all intents and purposes. When you walk through my front door, you can see her. And she's present throughout the house. She's got this very powerful presence and power. And I'm a devotee to Aphrodite. She's the goddess of sex and eroticism. Some say the goddess of love, but I think it's much more than that. It's love and lust. It is power, and it is that divine feminine ability to stir and to have that active force that just imprints itself on the imagination. And this is the thing, really, is that if you as a man can recognize that the feminine actually is very active and has its own form of activity, that's also a sign that you desire a female-led relationship, because you're recognizing that the feminine can be active. There's all this mythology about how the feminine is passive and the masculine is active. It's baloney. Yes, the masculine can be active, but so can the feminine. The way they're active can be different, and is different. A man who is fully in a place of being in a place of responsibility, where he is responding and paying attention to her, will recognize that she has a cycle that is different from his own. He will be able to actually pay attention to that cycle, and he'll recognize that there will be a time of the month where she is more active, and another time of the month where she is maybe more receptive, or she's in a place where she's just resting or whatever else. And that's because her physiological and biological cycle is different from what a man's cycle is. Men who are oblivious to this cycle are typically men who are not paying attention to what is really going on with her. And so they don't have that kind of awareness that ideally they would want to have. But if you're a man who's actually paying attention to that, you're tracking her cycle, you're taking the time to learn that cycle, you'll recognize when she's active. You'll recognize that active feminine current and how that shows up. And you'll also recognize that there are times when she's receptive. And let me clue you in on something here too, guys. Men also are not always active. Now, the difference is the way that their activity shows up, and that sense of activity shows up is different from the feminine. And that's a really important thing to do, to recognize the masculine active and the masculine passive, and the feminine active and the feminine passive are not the same. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that we make in our society, is that we tend to focus on this idea that, oh, that we're the same. We're not. Okay. We're equivalent, but we're not the same. There are differences, and it's really important to recognize those differences and honor those differences without getting into any specific notion as to, like, well, if you're this way or you're that way, you're, like, if you're feminine, you're, we're gonna evaluate you this way, or if you're masculine, we're gonna evaluate that way. I don't think that's helpful at all. But it's recognizing those differences and being able to say, okay, like, oh, okay, here's this man, he's in his very active energy, he's moving things along. And as a man, I'll also say, can you recognize when sometimes as that you are in that place where you're more receptive as a man, where you're experiencing that need to slow down, or where you're experiencing the full sensitivity of your heart and allowing that to be expressed. This is one of the areas that men have such deep wounding around, is that we have failed to fully recognize and appreciate our own nature. And as a result, we're not able to recognize and appreciate her nature either. We're not showing up in a fully powerful way. Sheena asks, can you speak to being raised in a Western patriarchal society and how that affects the perception and experience of men who desire female-led relationships? Yeah. This kind of goes back to what I talked about at the beginning. So there's this overall prevalent theme that I see right now, where men must lead. Men must be in charge of the relationship. Okay. I see this a lot. I see it out there in some of the men's work movement. I see it out there even from some different women who are like relationship coaches for men. And, they'll speak to that kind of messaging. And I think that whether they realize it or not, a lot of times what ends up happening is that they are unconsciously modeling that Western patriarchal thinking. And this idea of, like, around how the masculine is supposed to show up. So I think that the way it affects the perception and experience of men who desire female-led relationships, well, for one thing, a man who desires a female-led relationship may actually deny that he wants that. He may deny it to himself. He may deny it to other people for a long time. And I say that as a man who did that for a long time. Like, I struggled with accepting my submissive desires for a long, long time. The reason I struggled with accepting my submissive desires was because, it was like, oh my gosh, if I admit that I really want this, I'm going to be treated as less of a man. I'm going to be ridiculed. I'm going to be shamed. I'm going to be mocked. And these are things that many men carry with them. It's that fear of being seen that way, that fear of being seen that way by other men, but also that fear that if they were to say to their partner, to their wife or their girlfriend or their lover or whatever term you want to use, that this is what I want, that she's going to be like, I don't want you anymore. I'm going to walk away. And I mean, first of all, let's accept that sometimes there is a mismatch in relationships, right? But let's also accept something else. On a pretty deep level, we do know what we want, and we intuitively, men and women, tend to steer our way toward the types of relationships that we want. Now, not always in a healthy way. I want to be very clear about that. This kind of goes back to the whole, mother wound thing that I was talking about earlier, and like what happens when a man is getting into a relationship and he's really operating from a place of his mother wound as opposed to from a place of sovereign awareness around what he wants. When that occurs, then, that's there's some work there to do. But, I always found myself drawn to women who tended to be in charge, who tended to have kind of like a dominant energy. And at the same time, I never really had any problem being assertive or speaking up for what I want. And as Sheena, who is my mistress, has said before, like, she's observed me sometimes in interviews and things like that. And she's like, you know how to be in the flow and steer the conversation effortlessly. So it's not like, and this is kind of an important thing to make, is that I'm not submissive to any and everyone. I'm submissive to her. And there's a very real difference there. But I think for any man to admit that, yes, I really want to be in a submissive relationship. I really want to be in a female-led relationship where I'm perfectly comfortable with her taking charge of the finances, or I'm perfectly comfortable with her saying to me, "Hey, I need you to take care of some stuff around the house." And be comfortable with that, not be defensive, not anything else, but actually be willing to step up and do whatever needs to be done. Like, that's something that's hard for so many men because there is such a pressure. There's such pressure around performing leadership. There's such pressure around performing dominance for men. And there are a lot of men out there who don't want to be dominant, but when they're told, "Oh, you have to be a leader," what do? Well, if this is the only way I'm going to get a relationship, then that's what I'll do. Or if this is the only way that she's going to want to be with me, then I guess that's what I have to do. But again, this creates a lot of resentment. It creates a lot of conflict. And it ends up being one of those cases where it becomes a passion trap in a way. Now, if you're not familiar with a passion trap, there's a guy, I think it was a he, it might have been a woman, Dean DeLeese. I'm not entirely sure, but they wrote a book called The Passion Trap. And one of the things that they explored was this concept of the one up and the one down. Basically, when one person is pursuing the other person. And so this is one of the dynamics that I see in our society as well, is that we have this dynamic in place that a lot of men are caught up in, where they're always chasing after women, and they're chasing after them because they really want to be with them, and they think, okay, like on the one hand I have to lead, but on the other hand I have to chase after her. Well, aside from the fact that the chasing is just kind of neediness and like really desperation energy, and a lot of times is based on like a desire to get validation and approval from her, which is not the way to go, gentlemen. Um, the other aspect of it, though, is that there is such a pressure to show up a certain way. And that pressure to show up a certain way actually reinforces that neediness. Well, I have to be a leader. I have to show up in this specific way. And if I don't show up in this specific way, she's not going to respect me. She's not going to want me. So that's one of the things that I think it affects the perception and experience of men who desire female-led relationships, is that they're not actually being fully allowed to explore what that means and to give voice to it and explore the reality of like, oh, I don't have to chase and I don't have to perform leadership. I can be perfectly comfortable and grounded in my desire to be of service and to be devoted to her. And there was something really fascinating I read the other day where I was reading another Substack article, and a woman commented on it, and she said, when I finally accepted that my husband's desire to be devoted and of service to me, it changed everything in our relationship. So part of the challenge too is that for many women, they're going to say, "Well, I want him to lead," but they don't necessarily want him to lead. They just think they want him to lead because that's what they've been told. So basically, what we're dealing with are very narrow parameters around how to be a man and how to be a woman. And it's actually hurting us immensely as a society and a culture. And the solution isn't to go back to the 50s trad wife lifestyle unless that's something you really want. That's not the solution. The solution isn't for that men need to lead. The solution is that men need to figure out how to be in presence, whatever that means. They need to figure out how to be in presence. And for some men, that's going to be through service and devotion. For other men, it may be through the role of quote unquote being a leader. And for some men, they might be a leader in their workplace and they may come home and they may want to just be able to put that burden down and be fully in service to her without having to be the one who's in control. And how refreshing it might be if that could occur. Now, for a man to be able to do that, though, he's also got to be willing to recognize the pressures that she's going through and the experiences that she's having. And I think like one of the shortcomings that I see with a lot of men is that, a man will go and he'll be working at a job all day long, granted, but she may be as well. They come home and who ends up doing most of the chores and the housework? Even now, a lot of women are doing the majority of that. What would it look like if he actually showed up and said, you know what, I'll take care of some of these things? And he did it without her having to nag at him. Because let's be honest here, if a woman's nagging at a man, it's because she's saying, you're not paying attention to me. You're not hearing me. You're not seeing me. And everybody wants to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to know that they're gone. And when that doesn't happen, that creates a lot of ruptures in relationships. Okay, so I'm going to close out here in a few moments. If you have any parting comments or questions, this is a good time to get them in so that I can answer them. Um, I think what I will say in closing, as I'm waiting just in case that comes through, is if you desire a female-led relationship, first and foremost, do your work. Do your work on yourself. Make sure that this isn't coming from a place of codependence, that it's not coming from a place of trying to heal, old wounds from past relationships or from your parents, because that's important. Do that work. That will transform everything. But secondly, if you genuinely want a female-led relationship, ask yourself what that would look like. What does that mean? I can tell you that in my case, one of the ways that what it means is that when Sheena gives me direction and guidance, it brings a clarity and a focus that I didn't have before. I've a lot of times been more scattered than I would like. I'm a very creative person and I've gotten a lot of things done, but I'm a very scattered person sometimes. And one of the things that Sheena does is she'll kind of come in and she'll spotlight things for me to pay attention to or be aware of. She's able to rein in that scatteredness and focus me. And don't get me wrong, I still end up sometimes doing a lot of things. Like today I said to her, "Hey, I want to learn this program. Can you walk me through it?" And she's like, "Sure, yeah, let's go ahead," because she already had familiarity with the program. So I spoke up for something that I wanted, and then I took her direction on it. I learned about it from her, and and we kind of figured out together like how I'm gonna work with this and how we're gonna make this part of our process. But the key thing is that I was willing to surrender my need to quote unquote be in control and take direction from her. I have no problem taking direction from her. If anything, it is absolutely one of my deepest joys because the result is that there is clarity and focus. And I'm finding a level of, I'm going to say, success in some ways in my life because of the fact that in a very real sense, she's able to guide and direct me and focus me. And I'm grateful to her for it. And one of the things that she loves about being with me is that I'm willing to take action and do a lot of things that she doesn't necessarily want to do. So she can say, "Hey, I want you to take action on these things," and I'll leap into it and do the work. On the surface, if people were to look at our relationship, they might say, "Oh, Taylor is the dominant one because he's giving directions or he's asking for certain things or he's doing certain things a certain way." But stick around long enough and you would see in a very subtle way who is actually doing the directing and who might be and who is maybe taking action, but is taking action as a result of the direction, who is responding. Sheena says, and it's not emotional labor on my side. That's important. Yes. Yes, that's really an important thing too. One of the reasons why men need to do their work, their inner work, their emotional work is so that there's not the expectation that she's going to do the emotional labor. If you want to be in a female-led relationship, you necessarily have to have already done your work or at least be in the process of doing that work. Because if you're expecting her to do the emotional labor for her or for you, at that point, you're putting her into a situation that one is going to turn her off, but two is absolutely going to suck out the vitality of that relationship and that dynamic. A man who has done his work or is doing his work, who is fully comfortable and confident and grounded in himself, can show up. And let me be clear, there are times where I've gotten a bit anxious or I've fallen apart a bit, and Sheena's helped me with some of that process. And sometimes I've helped her. It's not like you can't ever fall apart or you can't ever struggle. And I think that that's the other thing to keep in mind. Like, we don't have to be perfect. There are going to be moments in your life where you're going to face a challenge or something along those lines, and being able to turn to the person that you're with and say, "Hey, I need help right now," is a fine and well thing. But it should be the exception and not the rule when it comes to emotional labor. Like having her help me out occasionally, when something comes up, or giving me some direction and guidance that way is perfectly acceptable. But if I was coming to her every day and expecting her to manage my anxiety and other things like that, that's going to really hurt our relationship in the long run. It's going to suck out the vitality and the eroticism and the juice and everything else. All right. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And feel free to heart this if you found this helpful, share it out there. And for men who are curious about this, I do have an upcoming workshop called Sacred Yes, which is going to be happening next week, and where we're going to be exploring what it looks like to embody submission and explore it and make it part of our identity. And then in January, I have a cohort starting up for submissive men which is called Devotion, where we're going to be doing a deep dive over the course of 8 weeks and exploring how submission shows up in our lives, how it shows up in our relationships, how it shows up in our desires, and how to own all of that in a responsible and powerful way, in a sovereign way, because that's what sovereign submission is all about. Again, thank you all for being here and have a wonderful day.